Ethnic and racial prejudice has been a recurring phenomenon throughout history, shaped by the power dynamics between different groups of people. While not an innate human tendency, the formation of ethnic and racial stereotypes often stem from political circumstances. Much like today, the ancient world had its own perspectives on ethnicity and race, some strikingly familiar to modern sensibilities, while others seem entirely foreign to us. In this series, we will delve into the notions of ethnicity and race across various ancient civilizations, including Greece, Rome, and Egypt. Through the lens of art, literature, and historical events, we aim to contextualize these concepts within their respective eras. In this first episode, we journey to the ancient polis of Hellas to explore how race, identity, ethnicity, and prejudice were perceived in the world of ancient Greece. Some definitions. The concept of racism in the ancient world differs significantly from modern understandings, which are rooted in the rise of capitalism, European colonialism, and the need to rationalize its accompanying brutality. Ancient Greece, while lacking modern racism as we define it, exhibited societal prejudices. Scholars continue to debate whether these biases qualify as racism, prejudice based on inherent biological features, or as ethnic prejudice defined by cultural traits and practices. Many contemporary scholars argue that the prejudices held by ancient Greeks toward peoples of the Near East were primarily cultural and linguistic rather than hereditary or biological. They also contend that the modern idea of racism originated much later, during the era of the African slave trade and European colonial expansion. When examining identity in antiquity, it's important to recognize that our understanding comes primarily from surviving written records and artworks. These were produced and preserved by the elite, reflecting their attitudes rather than those of the general populace. As such, the beliefs and biases of ordinary people in ancient Greece remain largely unknown and potentially divergent from elite perspectives. Though prejudices undoubtedly seeped into commoner populations, much like they do today, they were often shaped and reinforced by elite narratives. With this context in mind, we aim to approach the complexities of the past as holistically as possible. Authorial views on ethnicity and race. Ancient authors exhibited a wide range of perspectives on ethnicity and race, which varied significantly across different times and places. A recurring theme in their writings, however, was environmental determinism, the belief that climate and geography influence human traits and behaviors, often reducing entire groups to stereotypical others. For example, in the Archaic period, Hesiod's theogony described monstrous races inhabiting the fringes of the known world. This theme persisted in later works by authors like Herodotus and Ctesias, who recounted tales of fantastical beings, such as one-legged people with enormous feet living in India. These fantastical accounts reflected the Greek belief that extreme climates, vastly different from their own, could produce drastically different types of people, even altering their physical forms. Though these stories were nothing more than exaggerated myths, they underscored the Greeks' reliance on environmental determinism to rationalize their views of other cultures. Hesiod's pessimistic worldview is further illustrated in his theogony, which outlines the 5 ages of man: the golden, silver, copper, heroic, and iron ages, with the latter being his contemporary era. Similar to the concept of the yugas in Hinduism, Hesiod's narrative portrays a progressive decline in human virtue and quality of life. In the Golden Age under Kronos, humans were eternally youthful and lived in harmony, while the Iron Age is marked by hardship and estrangement from the gods. Hesiod tied these ages to distinct physical and moral characteristics, linking human decline to both behavior and appearance. Hesiod's account of the flood of Deucalion offers another example of Greek identity as distinct and exceptional. According to the myth, Zeus unleashed a great flood to eradicate the destructive copper race. The sole survivors, Deucalion and his wife Pyrrha, repopulate the earth in 2 ways: by throwing stones over their shoulders, which transformed into humans representing other nations, and by directly giving birth to Helen, the forefather of the Greeks. Helen's descendants, Ion, Iolaus, and Achaeos, became the progenitors of the main Greek subtribes, such as the Ionians, Aeolians, and Achaeans. This myth implied that Greeks had a unique lineage, separate from other peoples who were metaphorically born of stone. Different authors offered varying interpretations of human diversity. Aristotle, for instance, believed that non-Greeks, much like enslaved people in Greek society, were inherently servile and naturally suited for subjugation. His famed theory of the golden mean, the idea that virtue lies between extremes, was used to justify Greek superiority through environmental determinism. According to Aristotle, people from hot climates, such as Ethiopians, were overly submissive, while those from colder northern regions, like Europeans, were excessively aggressive. In contrast, Greeks who lived in a temperate climate were seen as the ideal people, embodying balance and moderation. Hippocrates, a seminal figure in Greek medicine, also subscribed to environmental determinism, applying it to his analysis of ethnic groups worldwide. This perspective tied physical and cultural characteristics to geography and climate, reinforcing stereotypes about various peoples. Furthermore, Aristotle's prejudices extended beyond ethnicity to include class and gender, asserting that these distinctions were physical and innate. For example, he claimed that slaves were inherently marked by physical traits suited to servitude, illustrating the intersection of classism, sexism, and environmental determinism in his worldview. Mental and physical distinctions in prejudice. Aristotle's views extended beyond environmental determinism to include a belief in inherent physical and mental differences between slaves and non-slaves, which he used to rationalize enslavement. When applied to foreigners, Aristotle argued that they were naturally predisposed to servitude, reinforcing his notion that Greeks were uniquely suited to rule over others. This perspective reflects how influential ancient thinkers could perpetuate essentializing prejudices, positioning Greeks as racially superior to other peoples. Herodotus, a contrasting perspective. In contrast to Aristotle, some Greek authors displayed more tolerant and nuanced views of non-Greek peoples. Herodotus, known as the father of history, is a prime example. His works often sought to explain the physical traits and behaviors of non-Greek populations without overt prejudice. Unlike Aristotle, who rarely engaged with foreigners beyond seeing them as slaves or merchants, Herodotus traveled extensively to the regions he described. For instance, in the third book of Histories, Herodotus dedicated significant attention to Egypt. He explored the differences between northern and southern Egyptians and their distinctions from Greeks, doing so with curiosity and respect. Rather than showing bias, Herodotus admired Egyptian knowledge and culture. Similarly, his account of the nomadic Scythians highlights their ethnic traits, including those of mixed Greek-Scythian ancestry. Herodotus also expressed admiration for the Scythians, particularly for their resistance to Persian imperialism. His portrayal of the Persians, despite their historical enmity with Greece, was also strikingly balanced. Herodotus refrained from depicting them as inherently servile or inferior. Instead, he acknowledged their distinct way of life and accorded respect to figures like Darius the Great, the Persian king of kings. For Herodotus, the Greco-Persian Wars represented an anti-imperialist struggle against foreign conquest rather than a clash between a civilized West and a barbaric East, a narrative often imposed on the text by modern interpretations. Ethnicity in law and social stereotypes. Having explored the views of specific authors, we turn to the broader social attitudes and legal frameworks surrounding non-Greeks in ancient Greece. This is a challenging endeavor due to the significant diversity across time and space within the ancient Greek world. From the Mycenaean to the Hellenistic period, and as Greek colonies stretched from Iberia to Pakistan, societal norms and laws varied greatly. These differences underscore the complexities of examining attitudes toward ethnicity and race in such a dynamic and expansive civilization. Greeks' relationship with non-Greek peoples. The Greeks' perception of non-Greek peoples often reflected their myths, politics, and evolving societal structures. Ancient Athens provides a compelling case study of how ethnicity and race were conceptualized, particularly with its claim to autochthony. the belief that its people were literally born from the earth. Unlike many other Greek polis that trace their origins to migrant founders, e.g., the Macedonians, who claimed Heracles as their progenitor, Athenians considered themselves descendants of the earth-born snake man Erechtheus. As democracy expanded in Athens, ethnicity became a focal point in defining citizenship, a phenomenon historian Jonathan Hall refers to as racialized citizenship. To preserve their exclusivity, Athenians increasingly viewed themselves as a distinct ethnic group. Solon, the archaic-era lawgiver, restructured Athens from an aristocracy into an oligarchy and introduced reforms that abolished debt slavery for Athenians. Consequently, enslaved populations in Athens came to consist predominantly of non-Athenians, as freed Athenians were replaced by foreign slaves. The ethnic composition of Athenian citizenry underwent further changes during the Peloponnesian War. To reward and enfranchise essential workers, such as the rowers of Athens' navy, citizenship was extended to those who demonstrated military service. This shift faced criticism from figures like Demosthenes, who lamented that Athens was becoming impure due to the inclusion of individuals not deemed autochthonous. Ethnic prejudice thus intertwined with political and class dynamics, as Athenian elites sought to restrict citizenship. One example of these restrictive measures was Pericles' Law, which tightened citizenship requirements to mandate both parents be Athenian. Wealthy Athenian men often married foreign women, using these alliances to bolster their wealth and status. Thus, Pericles' Law may have served as a populist move to limit elite privileges rather than being solely ethnically motivated. Citizenship and institutions in Greek polis. All Greek polis maintained unique frameworks for regulating citizenship, often linking it to participation in institutions like gymnasia or the agora. These policies were sometimes met with philosophical criticism. Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism, envisioned an ideal society devoid of gymnasia or courts. In his utopian polis, distinctions between native and foreigner, male and female, would dissolve. Citizens would embrace equality, virtue, and simplicity, wearing identical clothing and engaging in shared values without need for temples or strict institutions. Zeno's anarchist vision offered a radical critique of both Plato's class-based republic and Athens' exclusionary citizenship practices. Hellenistic developments. The Hellenistic period brought new dimensions to Greek notions of citizenship as Greek settlers established cities in far-flung territories like Babylon under the Seleucid Empire. These cities often incorporated Greek institutions, such as gymnasia, to distinguish Greek settlers from local populations. For instance, in Babylon, the Seleucids invested heavily in infrastructure for Greek citizens, while the Babylonian population had separate communal structures. This segregation sometimes led to tensions, particularly following the death of rulers like Antiochus IV. Although Hellenism often promoted Greek language, culture, and people, it also fostered ethnic prejudice in some cases. Yet the fluidity of these distinctions allowed ethnicity to serve as both a unifying and divisive force, depending on political necessity, general stereotypes, and their rejection. So, did the Greeks harbor specific stereotypes about other ethnic groups? And if so, did these stereotypes lead to widespread prejudice? These questions invite further exploration of the complex interplay between cultural identity, politics, and societal attitudes in ancient Greece. Benjamin Isaac's observations on Greek stereotypes. Benjamin Isaac notes that even in Homer's Odyssey, the Phoenicians are portrayed with a mix of admiration and suspicion. They are celebrated for their expertise in crafts, trade, and naval skills. But these talents are also tied to a stereotype of cunning and treachery. This duality reflects broader Greek attitudes toward the Phoenicians, their primary rivals in Mediterranean colonization. Ptolemy of Alexandria went even further, using astronomical theories to claim that those living east of Egypt were inherently duplicitous. Despite these prejudices, anti-Phoenician sentiment was not universal among the Greeks. Over centuries, Greek culture absorbed many Phoenician elements, with some scholars theorizing that the Greek goddess Aphrodite originated as the Phoenician deity Ishtar. Greek myths also acknowledge a notion of ex orient lux, out of the east light, as seen in the story of Europa, a Phoenician princess abducted by Zeus and mother of King Minos of Crete. Greek views on Egyptians and Jews. The Egyptians often earned admiration from Greek thinkers like Plato, Solon, and Herodotus for their wisdom. Yet they too were frequently depicted as deceitful and overly attached to animal-headed gods. Plutarch, for example, criticized Herodotus for his reverence toward Egyptian culture, dismissing their beliefs as foolish. The Jewish people faced harsher treatment in the Hellenistic world, often subject to early forms of anti-Semitic tropes and violent persecution. A notable example is the massacre of Jews in Alexandria in 38 CE, where Roman authorities exacerbated tensions. Greek criticisms of Jewish customs, such as the Sabbath, fueled these hostilities. Stereotypes of other Greeks. Even Greek-speaking peoples were not immune to prejudice. The Macedonians, for instance, were often considered not truly Greek due to their interactions with Thracians, Scythians, and Illyrians, peoples regarded as wild and martial. These divisions frequently served political purposes, as in Demosthenes' critiques of granting citizenship to non-native Athenians and enslaved peoples. Hellenistic cross-cultural interactions. Despite pervasive stereotypes, Greek culture exhibited significant hybridity in the Hellenistic period. In the Greco-Bactrian city of Ai Khanum, modern Afghanistan, elite Greek settlers adopted Iranian architectural styles and sponsored shrines practicing Iranian religious rites, blending Hellenistic and Achaemenid traditions. Similarly, in the Indo-Greek kingdom, King Menander I, Melinda, reportedly converted to Buddhism while continuing to feature Athena. On his coinage, Alexander the Great exemplified these contradictions. He sought to educate Persians in Greek traditions while adopting Persian royal customs, a strategy met with resistance from his Greek followers. These examples highlight the complex interplay of segregation and cultural synthesis during Greek expansion.